So I want to talk today about your presentation at the 92nd Street Y, your speech at the 92nd Street Y. And in there, you mentioned very, very clearly that you are of the belief that we have the honor of being hated. And I wanted to start by asking you, was there a particular moment, as we've seen this steady and alarming rise of Jew hatred, which made you realize that we, all of the collectives, all the various strands of diaspora and Israeli Jewry, have the singular honor of being hated?
Actually, it occurred to me on the 8th of October when I witnessed, as a journalist, a demonstration in Times Square, essentially cheering the mass murder of the previous day. And the people in the demonstration all struck me as people who probably had advanced degrees in the humanities. And they had a look of ecstasy on their faces. I sense then that essentially a constellation of despicable people, of the perfidious, what I called in my speech, the perfidious, the despotic, the hypocritical, the cynical, and the deranged, were enthusiastic about the mass murder of Jews, and that's, I think, where the idea germinated with me.
And so one of the things that you prescribed, or you prescribed several things, but there was a through line, which was that the Jewish people, as you said, should perhaps take this as a moment to stop caring and begin building their own institutions. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu was very strongly criticized here in Israel, you'll probably recall, for giving a speech in which he invoked the notion that Israel needs to turn into a Spartan nation, a nation essentially that stands on its own. I wanted to ask you how you would differentiate your prescriptions from that. In other words, that Jews build up their institutions, including the media. I'd love to hear more about how you think they can do that, the Jewish media, the Jewish press, but do not fall prey to becoming isolated and insulated, and they don't strike down that wonderful aspect of being the Jewish people, namely to provide robust social comment outside, beyond the walls of the Jewish community.
Well, my memory of the Prime Minister's remark is that he meant it a little more expansively, and that the quote about Sparta was taken out of context. My thought is this: tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in the Jewish world are today dedicated to what I think is essentially a hopeless task, which is fighting anti-Semitism. People will either like the Jews or they will not like the Jews, and I think there's very little in the so-called fight against anti-Semitism that makes much of a difference. I think what the Jewish people can do is essentially replicate what the state of Israel has done, which is to depend on its own resources, to build up its own identity, to create a sense of pride and meaning, and to turn Jewishness into a locus of identity, affiliation, and passion. One of the differences between Israel and American Jewry is right now, Israel is the great center of Jewish creativity, resilience, pride. It is the kind of the sun in terms of what Jewish life is about. Here in the United States, we face a very different situation in which too many young Jews, especially young American Jews, going to places like Columbia, I see the images on your screen of campus protests, have a very weak sense of what their Jewish identity stands for, other than that Jews were victimized in the Holocaust. And when you don't have a kind of a positive sense of what Jewish life should be about, it's no surprise that you invest all of your identity in a sense of victimhood. The purpose of Jewish life is not to replicate a history of victimization. It's to end a history of victimization. And so Jews have to move towards a much more positive vision of what Jewish life can be. Just to give you one example, Ben, the overwhelming majority of Jewish parents do not send their kids to Jewish day schools because most Jewish day schools are unaffordable and they're not readily available. And yet Jewish philanthropists are spending hundreds of millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars posting ads in the Super Bowl, which don't move the needle at all. So let's change the locus or the focus of Jewish efforts to build a much stronger, much more positive vision of Jewish identity, other than Tikkun Olam and Schindler's List.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, quite frankly. One of the organizations that you spoke about during that presentation, albeit in the questions and answers session that followed your prepared remarks, was the ADL. And it's caused, obviously, a back and forth within the Jewish space in the United States about the virtues or lack of virtue that one should attach to the work of the ADL and its effectiveness, really. What made you decide to pinpoint specific organizations and why the ADL in particular?
Well, that came about somewhat happenstantially. There was a question and answer session with Rabbi David Ingber after my talk, and he just sort of said, well, what would you do with organizations like the ADL? And I think a little bit too flippantly, actually much too flippantly, I said I would dismantle it. Actually, the ADL has functions which are genuinely useful. Reporting incidents of anti-Semitism gives us a clear picture of how bad things have gotten. Friends of mine tell me that the ADL works with law enforcement in the United States to track down potential, or anti-Semitic, violent anti-Semites before they have an opportunity to strike. And I think all of that, I should have been much clearer. I should not have suggested that all of that has to go. But to the extent that the ADL simply is in the work of trying to condemn Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens or some of our other major anti-Semites here in the United States, or anti-Semitic enablers, I think I just got to be candid. It's worse than useless. I mean, these are people, these anti-Semites are people who to some extent feed off of the condemnation and of groups like the ADL. I don't think it's actually serving the purposes of thriving Jewish life here in the United States. Build schools, build summer camps, send Jewish teenagers to Israel, give them a sense, invest them in the national debates, rather than ask them to be either fervent Zionists or anti-Zionists, but put them into the stream of Jewish life, and that's not really happening to a sufficient extent. And I'll just make one brief comment, Ben. 100 years ago in the United States, there was a thriving Swedish-American community in places like Minnesota with Swedish Lutheran churches, Swedish language newspapers. That is completely gone. And if American Jewry isn't careful, that is going to be the fate that befalls American Jewry, at least outside of its most orthodox elements. I think that would be a tragedy for the Jews. It would be a tragedy for the United States. So we have to change course to make sure that that's not our future as well.
But I want to ask you two questions, if I may. The first one is, since 2007, after lecturing at countless universities in the United States, I was warning whomever was willing to listen from the American Jewish establishment that Jew hatred on campuses was on the rise. And that 15 years from then, those individuals who were activists on campus would be the elected officials, would be in the media, would be the thought leaders. Very few people recognized the danger that I was overtly warning about, consistently so. And I think that 15 years is now, it's today. And I say
that student you're talking about is Zoran Mamdani.
There you go.
At the time would have been an undergraduate at Bowdoin College, or even a high school student.
Precisely, exactly emblematic of what I was warning about, and the paradigmatic example of it. So what I want to know is, at the same time, I was meeting with individuals at Yad Vashem. The ADL was doing something similar in that they were saying, look, the threat to American Jewry per se is really on the decline. We're going to universalize our mission statement. We're going to be, in the case of Yad Vashem, a watchdog for genocides, reports for genocides anywhere and everywhere, not exclusively of the genocide against the Jews during the Holocaust. For the ADL, it became a watchdog against hatred writ large, not merely exclusively for the Jewish people. They were blind to the threats that were on the way. Do you think that the American Jewish establishment, whether it be those organizations I've mentioned or others, will they rise to this moment? You've given a very clear warning and a prescription. Will they be responsive in your view?
Well, let's see. And I mean, the ADL actually has moved in a positive direction in the sense that it is no longer so focused on a kind of a universalistic mission, and it has returned under Jonathan Greenblatt to its original mission, which was fighting anti-Semitism, not fighting sort of every form of hate, in which anti-Semitism is just one component. But the problem that we have here is not simply the rise of anti-Semitism. The problem that we have is the rise of a set of ideas which I call antisemitic-adjacent, right? So if you believe in intersectionality, that is not on its face an anti-Semitic idea, but it tends almost inexorably to lead to anti-Semitic conclusions. If you believe in this idea called privilege, and that privilege is evil, and the idea of privilege substitutes for the old-fashioned notion of American success, you're going to find your way towards anti-Semitism simply because the Jewish community has had a great deal of success here in the United States. So the fight that has to take place is really kind of in the broader cultural wars. What the Jewish people can do, right, is simply in every facet of Jewish life be excellent, do our own thing. I quote the great composer, Jewish composer, Philip Glass, who says, when there is no room at the table, build your own table. And Israel is the great example of a Jewish people that built their own table. I should point out that to me, the most astounding fact of the last 2.5 years, in which Israel is not just subject to war on so many fronts, but to so much calumny worldwide, is to watch the Israeli economy continue to thrive, to watch companies continue to swoop in to buy Israeli unicorns and startups, to watch the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange go to unprecedented heights. It's because the country is making decisions for itself irrespective of what the rest of the world cares for it. And it's not bidding for the world's love, and it is increasingly indifferent to the world's hate. And I think that has a lot to do with some of the good decisions you have been able to make over in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, because those are decisions that aren't dictated by whether or not Israel or the Jews are winning someone else's popularity contest.
Well, Bret Stephens, thank you so very much. Let's hope that your prescriptions will be taken, and let's hope that in time, the next time there's an anti-Semitic candidate running for the mayorship of New York, 33% of Jews don't, in a muddled fashion, find their way to supporting that individual. I always appreciate speaking to you. Thank you for putting front and center the mind shift that the American Jewish community must make. It's ultimately for our benefit. And I look forward to you joining us in the future again on Opinionated. Thank you.
I'd be delighted. Thank you.